Ba-dum ba 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 da 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 dee da ba ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dee. Hello everyone, how are you all doing? Hello. Da 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 dee. Da 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 do. Diddly dum dum dum. Hello everyone, how are you all doing? Wow. Let's put that down to that. So, hello. That's going to be problematic, but I'll figure it out. Mostly by doing this. Can I slide myself this way? Yes, I can. Oh, that's good. Right then. Hello, Peter Van Dawson. Hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Seneca Nera. Hello, Colin Cameron. Hello, Colin Gansbeck. Hello, I'm 35 Benowitz. I've recorded tomorrow's video, by the way, not on this topic. This one will come out as Long Patrol on Saturday. So if anyone's looking forward to the Long Patrol rather than live on this one, the Long Patrol will be out on Saturday. That is New Year's Day. Tomorrow's video is going to be another of the triple turret videos because someone came back with a very good idea. And so I decided to test it out on UAD, and it's going to be up tomorrow. Let's see. Hello, Bitron. Hello, Matasaya Slavic. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Again, hello, George Newman. Oh, hello. Had to choose between you and World War II TV. That's terrible. That makes me feel bad for Paul. Hello, Nat Roger Paul. Good evening to Clarke and everyone. Happy New Year's in advance. Hope you're all doing well. You know, I understand Paul does incredibly good stuff. I always feel slightly bad when I nick people and people choose me over him. Or I think he feels the same when they choose him over me. We are supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be doing some videos on his channel soon, and I'm looking forward to them because Paul is lovely. And for the evidence, I'll be taking odds on the internet working today. If the internet doesn't work today, I'm going to be crying a lot. It's supposed to work. We had the lovely people from BT out, and basically they told us that the upload speed is not guaranteed, and that it depends on network usage. And that if there's a lot of people using the network, my upload speed will go down to toddle. Joyous life. Despite us having full fat fiber optic and the most advanced system they could give us. It's cute. Right. Evening, 9681. Evening, Sean. Evening, George Newman. Hello, DGE40. Hello, Grace Hussey. Hello, RAF. Bitron, you've been a member for 7 months. Thank you. Spotting from on high. Biblical lessons illustrated by the black man. Oh, hello, Lizard BB6. Hello, Poland. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, Zachary Gherkin. Hello, Jay Lingworth. Hello, Angus Flow. Hello, Mosh Bovgovitz. Hello. I don't think I've seen you before, but hello. Welcome. Hello, Stephen Richards. I really enjoyed the last 2 videos on the triple turret. You're going to enjoy tomorrow's one. It's another 3rd video on the triple turret. Carl goes, he was singing? Yes. Occasionally I do. Hello, Jonathan Burrow. Hello, Paul Westwick. Any idea when yours and Drax T83 design build will be released? I have no idea. It's taking its time. Yes, BT have excuses. That's what they always have. Right. 2 things. 1, I'm going to have a chocolate bar. So far, I haven't eaten anything today, so having a chocolate bar probably makes sense. And when I say I haven't eaten anything to me, I mean I haven't had a proper meal. I have had bits, but okay, every time I've been going to cook myself something weird has happened. Anyway, today's topic is the 1905-1906, well, 1905 to 1906 crisis and the 1911 crisis, which also technically goes into 1912. So it's a fun time. Hello, Bart Foster. Usually, at certain points when I start talking about these things, people go, "Ah, yes, these led to World War One," and I go, "Not necessarily. They certainly build into the picture which leads to World War One, but at no point does World War One become predetermined it's going to have to happen." Seneca Nero. I've always assumed academic papers are a quick thing to release. Equals in IT, everything moves at breakneck speed. I wrote my tribal battle and my tribal class destroyer academic paper. A very nice paper. About 5 years before the book came out. So it came out. The book came out at the end of this year. The journal article was actually published, I think, technically last year. And when I say last year, I mean 2020. So yeah, pretty much the time it took for that paper to actually get out, I had written and published the book. Almost. Sonic Clearance. The topic of my bachelor thesis that I registered in October is completely out of date and now one-click solution. Ouch. Zachary Gherkin, thank you. Various ideas for triple turrets have been great help in my coming up with my reconstruction ideas for various members of the ground fleet. It's been a great help for coming up with how I want them to look, or my interpretation of how Agincourt or 18-inch hood would look like. Let's be honest. Hood would have been 12 18-inch guns. Hood would have set the standard at which massive. Basically, her mere appearance would have been enough to probably make small nations cry. George Newman, a good paper like a good ship takes time. Yes. World War One, although it's a combination of events and circumstances, it's also a combination of, well, at some point today, I'm going to have to start discussing Kaiser Wilhelm, and I'm going to apologize. Now, because the language I'm probably going to use about Kaiser Wilhelm is possibly going to be a bit tough. Because he's not my favourite individual, and he's a bit of a twonker, in my opinion. Imagine a 4-ship Admiral class with 12 18-inch guns and 39 knot speed. I'd say go for a 32, 34 knot speed. The RN, no way they'd go slower than the Renowns for their hoods. So, yeah. 12 18-inch guns, 34 knot speed. Small countries crying if they see them that they go past, thinking that's our entire annual budget. So, here is some of the background of the Morocco Crises of what is going on. And I'm going to expand this out to full and hide behind it. But I'm going to start talking about it, and I'm just going to get it slide up, because I want to give you an idea of roughly what was going on, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of stupid, silly stuff going on. A lot of silly stuff going on. So, let's start off with the Dual Alliance, which is Austria-Hungary and Germany, is formed in 1879. It's one of those products of Bismarck. It's a wonderful thing. You know, Bismarck produces it. And in 1882, there's the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. There's also at the same time the Anglo-Egyptian War, which resulted in the British occupation of Egypt and control of the Suez Canal. which worried France, upset Russia, and terrorized the Austro-Hungarians because it now meant the British controlled both ends of the Mediterranean. In 1883, Romania sort of joins the Triple Alliance, but it never becomes the Quadruple Alliance, which tells you how public and how much effort the Romanians actually put into the alliance. In 1887, the reassurance treaty is signed between German and Russian empires. It provided that both parties would remain neutral if the other became involved in a war with a third great power, but that would not apply if Germany attacked France, which was Russia's traditional ally, or if Russia attacked Austria-Hungary, Germany's traditional ally. Germany paid for this Russian friendship by agreeing to the Russian sphere of influence in Bulgaria and eastern Rumelia, now part of southern Bulgaria, and by agreeing to support Russian action to keep the Black Sea as its own preserve. Now, let's be honest, neither of those are actually massive concessions, are they? And they're certainly not giving away much from Germany. But in 1890, Bismarck resigns, and because Kaiser Wilhelm forces out, and Kaiser Wilhelm embarks on what he calls Weltpolitik, which does literally translate as world politic. Yeah, Weltpolitik. Reassurance treaty is not renewed, as Wilhelm was persuaded by this secret treaty, agreeing to mutual spheres of influence and not getting involved in the case of war with a third great power, was too much in Russian favour. Someone please tell me what part of that treaty was at all bad for Russia and for Germany. I mean, in 1891, there's a Franco-Russian alliance, otherwise known as the Russo-Franco rapprochement. And that's the beginning of the Franco-Russian agreements, which carry on. Then there's the Anglo-German naval race, is often dated from 1898. In 1902, the British signed the Anglo-Japanese alliance. Now, here is one of those interesting things, because people then have a debate as to whether or not it's 1902, where splendid isolation ends, or whether it's 1904, with Britain and France signing a series of agreements which become known as the Entente Cordiale. I would point out that it's an entente with the French. It's an alliance with the Japanese. So I'm sorry, if I'm going to go for which one is a splendid isolation ending, it's probably the Anglo-Japanese one. And it's a Pendicaris affair. It also takes place in 1904, as does the Russo-Japanese War, which doesn't exactly improve Anglo-Russian relations, the Russo-Japanese War. I can't think why. And then there's the HMS Dreadnoughts, launched in 1905. The first Morocco Crisis takes place then. And the Anglo-Japanese alliance is renewed. Please note, the Anglo-Japanese alliance has been signed and has been renewed. Then there's a pig war in 1906 between Austro-Hungary and the Kingdom of Serbia, which really doesn't help Austro-Hungary out as far as the Balkans go. It really doesn't. It managed to upset both Russia and Serbia, and upset their own people as well. 1907, there's the Anglo-Russian Entente. Finally, there's a sort of agreement between the Russians and the British, but really, we don't get on that well. And mostly that comes down to us finally agreeing a line in Iran, or Persia it was called at the time, that neither side would cross as their own spheres of influence. But we weren't particularly keen on it. Then there's the Bosnian Crisis, 1908 to 1909. And finally, there's the Agadir Crisis. If you are getting from that the world is a little bit muddled and very, very busy in this time period, you would be right. And this is the key point. Honestly, at several points in this period, if you were going to ask who Britain was most likely to go to war with, it wasn't Germany. Even when we were having a naval race against them, it wasn't Germany. It was Russia. Because they kept doing things which were really annoying us, like announcing they were going to march on Afghanistan and reach India, like they were going to march through Iran and Afghanistan and reach India, like they were going to march into the Middle East and take Iraq and most of the Middle East and all the oil supplies, which we were starting to shift our navy to depend upon. All these things were not really good for Anglo-Russian relations. And then there was the Ottomans, who were constantly causing fun, and mainly being propped up by the British as a way to help contain the Russians, but they didn't really like the Ottomans either, because they were also causing trouble for them in the Middle East. It was just never-ending supply of fun. We also have, during this time, a relationship is agreed with Spain, between Britain and France and Spain. There is a very nearly, the Entente Cordiale very nearly encompasses Spain and Portugal as full-on members, as well as Britain, Russia, and France. And that could have an effect on World War One, quite a dramatic effect, because let's be honest, the Spanish army and the Portuguese army are quite well trained, quite there, and it's a nice land route straight up through France to the front. It's basically a complicated maelstrom of events, and it's not something which can easily be put to one side. Right, let's catch up with the chat, make sure I haven't missed too much. Hello, Nook. Let's see. I remember the 96831 on Hood. And that one. Paul Beswick. World War I is an amalgamation of ambition, dodgy politics, and too much unconditional support. Oh, too much, a lot of things. Second, now, I'm making mine 33 knots. Maybe with a little higher burst speed. Goes Rollo. Second, I heard about this crisis when it was mentioned in one footnote in a book, and that introduced the term cannon boot diplomacy to me. Oh, gunboat diplomacy. Cannon boot diplomacy. Yeah. Second, how about a burst of speed of 36 knots? Ooh. A lot of silly stuff. Nothing new there. Nope. Would the language you use to describe Kaiser Wilhelm be somewhat inflammatory? It's going to be nothing compared to what I'm going to talk about when I talk about a historian in a bit. Kaiser Wilhelm was too young. If Kaiser Friedrich would have lived more than 100 days, a few years maybe, history would be so much different. I don't think no matter how many years he had on him, Kaiser Wilhelm would have ever been any better. I honestly think he was... How do I put this? He was the German equivalent of Charles I. He was a moron. Unfortunately, they crop up in all forms of life. Royal families very rarely survive having a moron can actually achieve the throne. The fact that it survived, that the UK's one survived it, and has survived actually a couple of others, is predominantly due to the UK Constitution, but also due to the fact that it's occasionally served by people like Charles II and Queen Elizabeth II and Queen Elizabeth I, in that they've been lucky enough to go on long enough that they occasionally have the opposites of morons. People who are very adept at dealing with scenarios and politics. Vision. Imagining a 35 knot battleship with a 17-inch armor belt. That is what the Soviets thought the Iowas had during World War II. They were so depressed that they could not design a ship to match. And look, Morocco and Algeria still a trouble spot. Yes. So let's talk about the first issue in Morocco, because there's very nearly a war between France and America over Morocco before even the arrest happens. This gentleman, John Hanford Pendarvis, who is an American subject, but had been in the process of becoming a Greek subject, but hadn't actually lived in Greece and hadn't fully renounced his American citizenship, so was still an American subject, gets taken prisoner by a local, let's call him a rebel leader. I'm not getting into the internal politics of Morocco. Anyway, Mr. Perdicaris, a most prominent American citizen here, and his stepson, Mr. Varley, a British subject, were carried off last night from their country house, 3 miles from Tangier, by numerous bands of natives headed by Rasuli. I earnest request that a man of war be sent at once, situation most serious, from the American Consul General at Semingundir. The Americans end up sending roughly 7 cruisers. Things like this vessel. The Royal Navy ends up, well, they start off with a gunboat, and then they realise, hang on, we actually need something more here. Oh, frick, they're bringing half their blooming Navy. So HMS Prince of Wales, a battleship, turns up to go, hello, what's going on here then? Rasuli demands all sorts of things from the government, from the Sultan, for him to hand back these 2 captured individuals. And the French are honestly scared stiff that the Americans are going to demand as a concession from the Sultanate a port. It wasn't considered absurd. It wasn't considered unusual or anything like that, or even unnormal for the Americans to consider it, because guess what? We know the Americans, there were people in the American government who were considering demanding a port off the Sultan, so they had a port on the other side of the Atlantic, which they could call home for their fleet. This is nothing. Roosevelt is in power. He's pushing for he wants a strong navy. There's lots of people around him who are pushing this as a good idea, and this is scaring the French because Morocco is theirs. Is what they feel. Yes, it's not theirs. They haven't formally taken control yet, but they feel it's theirs. And this gets very, very dangerous. And the British are basically trying to manage this, going, we're going to end up with a war between the French and the Americans. Basically, it's like a naval version of can't cook, won't cook. Can't navy, won't navy. Oh, frick. We're just going to end up doing lifeboat rescue in the middle of the Atlantic, aren't we? Yes. Hang on, they've got the White Fleet. That's fairly good. Where is that? That's the other side of the world, and that's the best part of their navy at the moment, is doing a wrong part of the world. Oh, God. So what they've got left is the C team? The D team. Oh, yeah. What have the French got? Is that even a question? Oh, this is going to be embarrassing. It's quite, basically, HMS Prince of Wales spends most of her time during the crisis and during the Perdicaris affair, pretty much sitting between the French and the American squadrons and going, will you both please behave? Right, some questions. I think such an Admiral class would have prevented the treaties. I think such an Admiral class would have caused a whole new generation of treaties. Strategic arms limitations treaties eat your heart out. Carlos, elaborate please on the Austro-Hungarian-Serbian pig war. I am not elaborating on the pig war. I have done enough wars about pigs, okay? There's been the hog war I have discussed. There's been the Anglo-American war of pig war. There has been the war of the year. I am this Austro-Hungarian-Serbian war does not involve any ships. I am avoiding that. Why are so many wars to do with pigs? Okay, I know the world loves bacon, but this is just wrong. Not a good time to put a cavalry officer in charge of the Admiralty. No. I can't remember. Would you say the Anglo-Japanese alliance was a measure aimed at offsetting the dangers from Russia and the US? I'd say it's a measure of offsetting the issues from Russia. because I'd say it's about dealing with the Franco-Russian alliance. So the idea was that the British could deal with the French. If they ended up in basically the idea was if you have Japan as your ally and you end up in a war with France and Russia, because remember it was come to your aid if you're fighting any two powers. Then Russia can't bring their squadron back to Europe because they're having to deal with the Japanese. You've got the Japanese fleet to help you deal with the French colonial assets in the Far East and possibly wind up their territories up there, now over there, and you can concentrate on the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And that's pretty much the British policy. That's the whole Anglo-Japanese alliance. And that's also why it's an entente with the French and an alliance with the Japanese, because the British don't trust the French because they're allied with the Russians, and the British do not trust the Russians. They expect to be at war with them at any point. This is one of the reasons for the phrasing of the language, because the British are not calling it an alliance because they don't treat it like an alliance. It might be an alliance on paper in de facto, but it isn't an alliance as far as a lot of British strategic thought is concerned, because they do not trust the Russians. And they don't trust the French to back them over the Russians. Don't forget a couple of Balkan wars before World War I. I mentioned a couple of them. I do agree. One way or another, some sort of treaty would be required soon after war. The cost would be absolutely staggering and difficult to sustain long term. Possibly, but the treaty would be probably be worded. I think in myself, if you've got an admiral class, if you've got 4 admiral classes you were discussing existing, as was shown in this sort of period when we're talking about the treaties around us, the treaties wouldn't be the same. That's the point. The treaties are set at the level they are because that's the level of viability. But if you have, I don't know, 65,000, a 465,000 ton admiral class in service, you probably have equivalents from the Americans and the Japanese under construction, and probably everyone's allowed 4 super battleships. Just like everyone's converted, that might be it. That might well be the way it gets around. It might be a case of, okay, you're allowed a certain number of regular capital ships, and you're allowed 4 battle leaders. It wouldn't be unusual. How did they get around the destroyer problem later in the 1930s when they were trying to figure out, because people wanted to build bigger destroyers? They came up with the destroyer leaders. It would be the same thing with the capital ships. So probably, how do I put it? The British and the Americans were allowed 18 ships each, so they'd probably be allowed, let's say, 4. If the Royal Navy has the 4 Admiral class, 4 super battleships each, and then you work it down and you go, right then, well, the Japanese are allowed 10 to our 18, and so they're allowed 2 super capital ships, and you'd work it through that way. George Newman, Hello, Ferrican. Anglo-Russian, George Newman, Anglo-Russian relations really get helped by the 1904 Duggar incident. Not, no. Kenry, the German approach to diplomacy during these crises reminds me of Wolf Warrior diplomacy today. It's very, very similar in that they are prepared to try and bluff and threaten a war, but the moment they're actually someone bluffs them back, they go, we don't want this. But you have to be careful, because you pull it too many times, you end up in trouble. Anuk, cousins Kaiser Wilhelm and Kaiser Nicholas were both unprepared for their thrones. Mm-hmm. America's over. At level 98 bear hunting in it. A Franco-American conflict would have been interesting. It would have been interesting, mostly from what would end up in the Atlantic. Grace Elsie. Wilhelm might have turned out better if the doctor hadn't crippled him during their birth, and if he had had better tutors, but who knows? There is only so much you can blame on a tutor. Hello, Cascadian. Good morning to the USA. Nice ignorance. So the British sent HMS Prince of Wales, the London-class pre-dread Naval ship, and what does her arrival do? Basically, she turns up and, as I said, she basically turns up and spends most of the time refereeing between the French and the Americans. Actually, if you ever look at the picture of the ships, there is a picture of the ships that goes around, you'll see there's obviously where she's supposed to have been have put herself anchored herself, and there's where she actually anchors herself in the damn slank middle of the harbour, in between the two groups. I'm just going, yeah, I'm here to keep you apart. Hello, Roland Cash. You are quite correct. A fictionalized version of Pendacaris incident was what the plot called Wind and the Lion. And yeah. Hello, Richard. Hello, Concentratus. Oh, too many pig wars. John Shea, please stop talking about wars over pigs. I can't stop laughing. I don't know why there have been so many. Why? Why do we keep going to war over pigs? What is it? And oh yeah, you have to go there. The Bay of Pigs invasion. Yes, Seneca. I know we haven't grown out of our war over pigs. Ah, Dara Barons. Sorry to it. Your book just arrived. Thank you. I hope it's good. Hurricane chicken guided with some. Okay. So, here are the 4 interesting individuals who cause the most fun in the crisis coming, and the crisis we're going to talk about. We have Malaway Abdel Alaziz IV, Sultan of Morocco. A perfectly nice and affable person, it seems. Although, probably not if he's in charge of ruling you. And absolutely between a rock and a hard place, and pretty much no chance of getting out of it, because you need to be a lot smarter and a lot more capable at diplomacy and strategy and judgment of judgment of your fellow man to actually survive it. Ends up losing his throne to his brother, Kaiser Wilhelm II. The gentleman who believes in world politics. What can I say about him? He makes some of the Louis look like they have a sane diplomatic policy. I mean, literally, there are diplomats there are actual French kings who are doing foreign policy and have special agents who are pursuing a completely different foreign policy than their actual government, which they also said is doing, which looks more coherent a foreign policy setup than what this man manages to implement. Okay? He is strategically moribund and possibly the most pompous mustache here, barring potentially the other two. Because we have Burlow, who at one point is actually threatening war because of the situation this one's decisions have got him into, even though he doesn't want war and knows they're not prepared for it. But he thinks if he bluffs, he can bluff everyone. And then you have Théophile de Classy, who is, well, I used this cartoon for him, but I wanted you to see what he really looked like, so I did put a small picture of him up above. How do I describe him? Honestly, what Knight 6831 has just written in the chat, probably about Kaiser Wilhelm, would apply very much for Théophile, because he takes credit a lot for the Entente Cordiale. And he treats it as a massive victory. And it really isn't. Because the Entente Cordiale stays strong because the British choose for it to be strong. But he hasn't ever really noticed in it that it's got a lot of grounds in there for the British to pull out. And it's the same with the Triple Alliance, because if you can remember, both Italy and Romania, the fourth member, the secret member of the Triple Alliance, both decide not to get involved in the Triple Alliance in World War One on the side of the Austro-Hungarian Germany, because they go on the offensive, and it's a defensive alliance. And it's the same with the Entente Cordiale. It's at best a defensive alliance. So when he's going around threatening war and saying he's going to be the big I am, the British are telling his president, yeah, you fire first, we ain't backing you up. Hello, Desert Foxo. So anyway, two of these guys sport amazing mustaches. Yeah. It's just no. Cascading, why did Kaiser Wilhelm II diverge his foreign policy from that of Bismarck? Was it just the classic personalities? No, it was because he was stupid. No, let me be more blunt on this. Kaiser Wilhelm believed his own press, which is the worst thing to do as a leader. Never believe what the press writes about you. And he also believed that, how do I put this? He almost seems to have this divine right of kings idea going through his head. And that because he's a king, he knows better than mere mortals, including people like Bismarck. And he never wanted to listen to everyone who told him he was wrong. So he kind of surrounded himself with yes men. As long as you were telling him exactly what he wanted to hear, he was very happy. And Berlo was very happy to tell him exactly what he wanted to hear because he considered that the key to his role. And you have to remember, the Chancellor serves at the pleasure of the Kaiser, not at the behest of any of the public or public vote. Kaiser Wilhelm gets a Kaiser Frederick third class pre-dreadnought battleship named after him, which ended up sold for scraps in 1922. Hello, Sever Thompson. Basically, they're interesting souls. They are interesting souls, all four of these gentlemen. And I could get into the various other interesting souls involved, but really, these are the four personalities you need to think about in these crises. The British are mostly playing the part of, oh no, not again. The Americans are mostly looking from their side of the Atlantic and going, hey, hey, you have to deal with that. They're on your side of the Atlantic. The British are going, shut up. Quite a lot of the other powers are going, we don't want to have anything to do with this. We're trying to avoid it. Nothing to do with us. Nothing to see here. Anyway, let's consider the first crisis, the Tangier crisis. And this is an example of how not to do a foreign policy, okay? The Tangier crisis is a really good example of how not to do a foreign policy. So, here's the thing. In 1905, the Kaiser goes for a sail, okay? He's in his yacht.
He's off for a sail. He's off for his holiday. It's wonderful. I'm going on holiday. I'm Kaiser Wilhelm. I feel good. I've had some success in the Boxer Rebellion, and the British have been fighting the Boers, and I've been doing some naughty things, trying to supply the Boers with arms, which gave them false confidence that I would actually do something to help them. And then when actually anything happened, I did nothing because I found out that I couldn't, because the Royal Navy said, you want to try it? And then so now I'm on my holiday. And what am I going to do? I turn up in Tangier. Oh, yes. And what do? I go and have a nice meeting with the Sultan and the representatives of him in Moradaz, and I have a chat with him. And I tour the city on the back of a white horse. Don't I look great? Don't I look amazing touring the city? Am I not glorious? You can see him. If you look carefully in this photo, you can see the pomposity. He is wearing a heavy helmet in a hot Morocco. Why? Anyway, and, he declares he had come to, instead of coming on his holiday, he had come to publicly support the sovereignty of the Sultan. That's wonderful. When you've got the French have been basically running Morocco as a protectorate, suddenly the German Kaiser, the leader of the German nation, has turned up in Morocco to declare he's publicly going to support the French sovereignty, the Sultan's sovereignty. A statement which surprisingly didn't go down well with the French, and also because the Sultan suddenly thought, I have a major power backing me, a major military power. This is Germany. This is the Kaiser himself has come here to tell me he supports me. Decides to reject a set of French proposed governmental reforms and issued invitations to major world powers to a conference, which would advise him on the necessary reforms. Okay, right then. Can we all see the problem that has just happened here in this age? Okay. I can't think of an equivalent scenario, but because it's rather sort of, let's see. It would be like today. Let me just check. Now, if I remember correctly, Guam is United States territory, but isn't a state. So it's not quite the same as Morocco, but it would be the equivalent of the President Xi of China turning up in Guam and having a chat with the governor, and the governor then rejecting whatever come down as federal mandate and declaring that there's now going to be an international conference to go over it. It's not quite the same because Morocco is still technically an independent country, whereas Guam is far more joined in. But that's the closest modern analysis you could really have as an example of what we're talking about. Not good, is it? Not good at all. And it gets worse. It really does. It gets a lot worse. There is... Sorry. My phone's going off for some reason. Ooh. Yeah. Right. Hopefully got through that. So, and it gets, as I said, it gets worse. It does get worse. The French foreign minister, Philippe de Classy, decides to take a defiant stand, saying there was no need for a conference. Berlo, the German chancellor, threatens war unless there's an issue. There's at a conference. But
you know, Kaiser Wilhelm starts to prevaricate and go, oh, hang on, this looks bad. So he's now caused this trouble. Now he's going, my study of history hasn't encouraged me to strive for world domination. In the empire of which I dreamed, the German Empire will be trusted by other countries and must be seen as honest and peaceful neighbor. You just did this. It's not stupid, not smart. Okay, I'm going to have to quickly pause for a second on the live. I'm sorry about this. I'll be back shortly. Got to go deal with something in the house. It'll be about 5 minutes. I do apologize. Hello, everyone. Sorry. I don't like to dive off in the middle of a live, but I do apologize for that. Turned out to be necessary. My mum had some trouble getting out of a chair, and I suddenly got a message going, "Are you free?" And I responded, "No, I'm doing my live." What's wrong? It's just I've kind of stuck. And the response was, "How stuck?" So what had happened is she has one of those lovely chairs, which has bits which come up, etc. You recline a chair, and instead of sitting down on the chair, she managed to sit on the recliner bit, and my sister couldn't lift her in. So basically, I had to go do the big strong son bit. Sorry about that. Everyone's okay. No one's hurt. Just kind of was. Yeah, I gotta go right now. Oh. Anyway, hello everyone. Nice, Aaron. I bet the Americans regret laughing at the British decades later. To be fair, we both tend to laugh at each other. We are that kind of friends. We became that kind. It's one of those things. When we weren't friends, we were not sometimes all that nice to each other. But we are already have reached that nation, that sort of level of well, we all know it. If you're quite nice and quite polite to someone, they are probably in between two guys in a friendship, then they're probably only a normal acquaintance. If you're absolutely awful to someone, they're probably one of your oldest and best friends. Jeremiah, at this point, wasn't the second Pacific Recording having a slight problem of being Toshimaed? Or is it a little bit earlier? That's sort of around about this time. It is an issue. Oh, right. Second, that would be the same as some world leader declaring Taiwan to be an independent country or Tibet. I didn't want to touch that particular issue with a barge pole. So sorry about that, Circle of Doom. For a second, concerning need, one can note that the crisis may be resolved in a better way with those historical lessons in mind. Really not. You'd hope they do it better, but they never seem to do it. Oh. That's good. No, the message from Mum was, have you started your live yet? Yes, Mum. Okay. I should be okay. Message from sister. She's stuck on her chair. Can you come? Because my back can't take this. Second message from Mum. I might need your help after all. Okay, coming. Oh. That's what. No, my sister. I love my sister dearly, but of the two of us, there's reason I'm the one who goes to the gym regularly. Hello, Dutchman. Yes, that is the first circle of doom we can't pin on the BT. It's terrible. But my mum apologizes. She doesn't like interrupting the lives. She knows I like doing them. It's kind of like bilge pumps. There are some things which she thinks I do because, frankly, they help keep me sane in weird times. And that's probably right. So, the first Moroccan crisis, it just gets even more fun because the French Prime Minister Maurice Bourrivier refuses to risk war with Germany over the issue. So, Neclasse resigns. Woohoo! Well, that's one less interesting indeed involved. And in July that year, France agreed to attend the conference. Now, here is the point. The conference takes place in Algeciras. Germany calls up its reserve units. The French move troops to the German border. And the conference itself lasts from January to April. Of the three nations present, the German representatives found they only had support of Austria-Hungary. And that's mainly because the rest all turned up and Britain sorted them out. And the Algeciras conference is a kind of a demonstration in how not to do diplomacy, because you end up with Germany, Austria-Hungary, Great Britain, France, Russia, Spain, United Kingdom States, Kingdom of Italy, Morocco, Netherlands, Sweden, Portugal, Belgium, and Ottoman Empire, all sending representatives. Woohoo! Isn't that wonderful? As lessons of history go, the more nations you have involved in any conference, the more likely you are to get a weird result. There's a very interesting phraseology put forward by Heather Jones, and I found it in a very interesting working paper, which actually I found the first link to in one article, and then I found one place, and I found another link to it on the Wikipedia page. So if you want to go find it, you can find a link to it by Heather Jones on the Wikipedia page on the Algeciras conference, which is another German strategy was stage dramatic gestures and dangerously play up the threat of war, in the belief that this would impress upon other European powers the importance of consultation with Germany on imperial issues. The fact that France had not considered necessary to make a bilateral agreement with Germany over Morocco rankled, especially given Germany was deeply insecure about its nuclearly acquired great power status. Hence, Germany opted for an increase in belligerent rhetoric, and theatrically, Kaiser Wilhelm dramatically interrupted a Mediterranean cruise to visit Tangier, where he declared Germany's support for the Sultan's independence and integrity of kingdom, turning Morocco overnight into an international conference. The trouble is for the conference is that after you prose it, you then have a problem in that you have a scenario with the Sultan and his own representatives. And this is the problem. The actual international conference goes against the Sultan and against the Germans because the Sultan can't manage it. And actually it's set up as no decision can be made, whether affirmative or negative, without his instruction or orders. The representatives of the US and European nations could easily contact their capitals to consult their respective governments, while Fez had no telegraph or telephone, nor was it served by any rail or paved road that would allow them to inform the Sultan of developments at the conference. And actually, the fact is that the conference was mostly being discussed in English and French, and the Moroccan delegation actually had to use Advocate Benhabit, an Algerian translator present at the conference in the service of the French, i.e. paid for by the French, to act as their translator. Unsurprisingly, the conference doesn't go well for them. Basically, it concludes that Morocco's police and customs regulations concerning repression of smuggling of armaments and concessions to European bankers from a new state bank arms and concessions to the European bankers from a new state bank of Morocco, issued banknotes backed by gold with a 40-year term. The new state bank was backed as Morocco's central bank with a strict cap on spending of the Sharifan Empire, and its administrators were appointed by the national banks, which guaranteed the loans: the German Empire, the United Kingdom, France, and Spain. Spanish coinage continued to circulate rather than, and so that added quite a lot of American dollars, thanks to 70,000 of them being demanded to pay for the earlier recovery of some individuals. And the right of Europeans to own land was established, whilst taxes were to be levied towards public works. The Sultan of Morocco retained control of the police force in the 6 port cities, which would have been composed entirely of Moroccan citizens, on an average salary of a mere 1,000 pesetas a year. But they were now to be instructed by French and Spanish officers who would oversee the paymaster, the Amin, regulate discipline, and be able to be recalled and replaced by their governments. The Inspector General in charge would be Swiss and would reside in Tangiers. At the last moment, the Moroccan delegates found they were unable to sign the final act because of the various issues, and basically Abdelaziz had to issue a decree to ratify it. In other words, you couldn't have a worse diplomatic scenario if you tried for any of the major powers involved. It was just not a good scenario. But the French came off feeling very secure because the British had backed him. And the British had visibly backed them because the British fleet had turned up in Gibraltar, not far from Algeciras, and had basically just appeared there. And just reminded everyone, yes, just remember, you can all talk as much as you like, but you're only getting to Morocco, any of you, as long as we allow you to get there. If we don't want you to, you won't. It was good. There were peaceful times. It wasn't a unipolar world by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a multipolar world with one power being able, as long as they didn't cause everyone to unite against them, being able to maintain a level of peace in the name of trade. Thomas, thank you. Right, so that's good. With the British, if you're perfectly civil to someone, you probably hate them. If you question their lineage, intelligence, and prowess, you probably get on with them and really quite well. Yep. Thomas over. P.S. Lovely book you published. Got a copy 3 days ago. Nice read. Lots of direct pictures though. And Eskimo without a bow. Don't Eskimos use me as not most? So how can an Eskimo lose a bow? Yeah, it happens. I wonder how different history would be without Kaiser Wilhelm II. Well, judging by Frederick, it could be very different. You could have actually seen an Anglo-German alliance against the Franco-Russians. So you could have ended up with a world war, well, a European war, with Germany basically beating up the French and the Russians, and the British assisting them in it. Because the French and Russians decided to do something annoying to, like, march to India. And you could have ended up with an Anglo-German-Japanese alliance. Think about that, if that goes into the 20s and 30s for poor America. A victorious, and quickly victorious, if you judge by the pace of things, German military, German and British maritime strength, German military strength, and Japanese as well. Ooh, that could have led to an interesting world war. Or possibly America joins it and becomes the founding part of what, some sort of League of Nations or United Nations, with those 4 powers as the Security Council. That's always the other option. Mm-hmm. Sure. By sort out, do you mean the British said, if you make us think about this, we will impound your merchant fleet? Pretty much. There's something. Or you're about to be hoisted up by your as a result of one international conference. A lot of nations know what that feels like. Yeah. That's good. I wonder how things would have gone if Otto von Bismarck had decided that he preferred Vienna over Berlin and supported Austria to become the leader of the German states in the mid late 1800s. It could have been an interesting world, but it was Prussian and proud. That's good. The British have a lovely storage facility for all imported vessels at the bottom of the mid-Atlantic. Yes, but we prefer to use them. Thomas said, yeah, Bismarck was way too much German for going the Austrian route. Prussia had a war against Austria before, so I don't think that would work. Nope. So the UK could have had the Angevin Empire back. To an extent, that could well have been the result. Hello, we'd like Northern France. It's fun times. So resolution round 1 is interesting. It is certainly effective. The legacy, well, this is what I do love a good Punch cartoon. There is an Anglo-French Entente Cordiale, and that's decided to be strong. And here you've got the Kaiser with a sword, looking scary. And you've got the Marianne, the French harlot, as the British tend to call her, being protected by John Bull, the British gentleman. Looking quite smartly dressed for John Bull. Usually he looks a little bit more characterful than that. But you also have this other fun. You have the Spanish Edward, King Edward is sent to Spain to talk with Alfonso, and we have the Pact of Cartagena signed. Now, the Pact of Cartagena is a very interesting document in that let's put it this way. It sounds almost like a version of the Entente Cordiale, in that it's an exchange of notes where the parties declare their intention to preserve the status quo in the Western Mediterranean and Atlantic, especially their insular and coastal possessions. It's signed between Spain, Britain, and France. And, it's one of those... One of the things I'm most sort of distressed by is that the papers I found on this, the most recent one is 1981. And that's an interesting one because that's in Spanish. So I didn't manage to read that one that much. But there is one in the American Political Science Review by Charles Cunningham. That was published in 1917, Spain and the War. And William Langer, Tribulations of Empire, the Mediterranean Problem, which was published in the Foreign Affairs in 1937. So there have been papers published on these agreements in 1917, 1937, and 1981. Now, I'm not a diplomatic historian, so this is not my area to start talking about, but I would say the Pact of Cartagena is a pretty crucial document to go and look at because it very nearly ends up with Spain joining in the Entente Cordiale and going into World War One. And in fact, there are lots of people in Spain who argue they should do because of this agreement. And that could have had an interesting impact on World War One because the Spanish army is not exactly small. It's not massive, but it's not exactly small. And it could well have represented quite a coherent force. And what I'm saying is Spanish troops coming in as well as British troops, etc., could mean that the America effect might happen earlier thanks to Spain's involvement, which could set up a whole different scenario where Spain feels like it's the critical power in Europe after they've been the critical troops which came in and helped out with World War One. It could be an interesting idea. Mm-hmm. And Knights of the US would have demanded the Anglo-German naval Japanese alliance in Washington Naval Treaty disband. Knight 6831. This is the problem, though. Okay, you're presuming the Washington Naval Treaty of 1920 happens, and if we've assumed that World War One isn't a world war, it becomes very much a European war where America doesn't get involved, where the Anglo-Japanese and Anglo-German-Japanese alliance wins. Why are they going to disband? And again, don't take this the wrong way, but if you consider the economies of the three nations involved at that time, America's choice would be to join it or to fight it. There wouldn't be a rival powers they could unite with because they wouldn't want to reunite with Russia. They might be fine with uniting with France, but they're not really that keen on it. And so the odds are they end up joining it. But it's also a case of that a World War One, which is over in 1915 and is a quick victory, doesn't lead to the same economic scenario you get, which leads to some of the Washington Naval Treaty stuff. Hi, Carl Harmon. Wasn't it? Good Bismarck quote. Well, hypothetical Bismarck in character would help Austria. He was a rather good statesman. Maybe he'd keep Austria stronger, but the problems of Austria would remain. No. It would require a very good politician to manage to make Austria work. A very multi-talented one. Discord, I'm not sure if World War I had been a Franco-Russian alliance against the Anglo-German alliance that the war would have gone in such a way that naval treaties would be deemed necessary. For starters, there probably wouldn't have been the Anglo-German naval race. Think about that. In a nicest way, the German Navy has a reason to be built up if they're planned on fighting the British, and that's strategically the army, etc. But if they're a major military power in the Anglo-German-Japanese alliance, then the Navy is what they're going to do. Be an extra squadron to help beat up the French. I think the Royal Navy has that covered. What the British would persuade the Germans quite quickly to do in that alliance would be, you're the major military power in Europe. Go for it. Have a massive army. And the German army, there's quite a lot of German politicians who'd be very keen and happy with that. Spain also had a large small arms industry that could have been ramped up vastly and would have seen Spain industrialized 70 years early. Hello, World War II submarine history of a haiku. Sure, Anglo-German, Japanese, British alliance. I can either see Japan getting pushed out or the alliance fracturing over Japanese territorial ambitions with the Brits and Japanese. Or on one side and Germany, US on the other. Or alternatively, again, you're forgetting that if this alliance ends up fighting European war, the Japanese territorial satisfaction might be achieved by, here, have the French French Far Eastern territories. In which case, Japan's too busy consolidating the territories they've got. But that's all completely off the topic of this discussion. Now, the legacy, there is also, well, the British are dragged kicking and screaming into what is referred to as sometimes the Anglo-Russian Entente, but actually the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907. Again, There is a language difference going on here. It's an alliance with the Japanese. It's an entente with the French. It's a convention with the Russians. Please note these words have meaning. They have value. There's a fox. Why were German and Austria so closely aligned? In the end, my enemy's enemy becomes my friend, and also Kaiser Wilhelm. Okay, so the convention relates to territories in Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet. And it was forced because the Germans were trying to build a Berlin to Baghdad railway that was supposed to align the Ottoman Empire with the Imperial Germany. And for some reason, that really annoyed the British and the Russians enough that they actually, despite having a dispute over Persia, which was decades old, and other issues, basically Great Britain promised to stay out of northern Persia. Russia recognized southern Persia as part of the British sphere of influence, although neither was technically annexing Persia. They were just dividing up the country as spheres of influence. You can work out what that means. Russia also promised to stay out of Tibet and Afghanistan. In exchange, London extended loans and some political support. And most importantly, it stipulated that neither country would interfere in Tibet's internal affairs and recognized Britain's influence over Afghanistan. Which Britain then went around and go, we have influence in Afghanistan, and the diplomats went, we do, don't we? And the army was going, yeah, we do, and the Navy was going, can any of you read a map? We do not have influence in Afghanistan. We don't even have presence there at the moment. What happened to you all? Sure. The British felt they needed to pretend to be friendly to the French, but of course, entente is a French word, so it doesn't mean anything because French is nonsense. Entente cordiale. It's friendly, but it's not an alliance. So, a second crisis. And I want you to think about the second crisis because I can see this happening again. I really can. This is the Agadir crisis. And here is what happens. In 1911, a rebellion breaks out in Morocco against the Sultan. The French, after forcing the Sultan to request their assistance, prepare to send troops to help put down the rebellion under the pretext of protecting European lives and property in Fez. The actual danger to French European communities, some sources describe as remote. I'm fairly certain some people who were there felt it was less remote. But, you know, that's interesting. And although the rebellion had actually broken out deep in the interior, so I'm not sure how much credence I will give to. Yeah, all fine. Sorry, phone went off again. I was going, oh, good God, she's not stuck again, is she? No. All good now. Anyway, anyway, they dispatch a flying column, the French do, at the end of April. And on the 5th of June, the Spanish deployed troops to occupy Larache and Alcazar, fearing a French annexation of the whole country. So basically, the Spanish have got troops in there because they're worried about that, and the French have got troops in there. And then well, now this is where things start getting interesting because the French Minister for Finance, Joseph Clarke, decides to chat with German diplomats in May 1911 and tells the German diplomats that France would be prepared if the Germans recognised its vital interest in Morocco to make concessions elsewhere. In June, France agreed to start negotiations over this. This is the rebellion is going on. There aren't even troops there. This is another country they're discussing. But this is what you deal with this period. After 10 days, the Germans had still not responded. It was then that Kindelwachter, the German foreign minister, asked the Kaiser for permission to send a gunboat, having rejected the need to send 2 ships out of belief the French would be quickly willing to negotiate. So they're just sending a gunboat. This thing, the Panther. It was under the pretext of protecting German interests. And a few days later, a Bremen-class cruiser, SMS Berlin, arrives to replace the gunboat. A single German civilian, Hermann Weber, who lived 110 kilometers to the north of where they arrived, in Agadir, journeyed south to be rescued and arrived 3 days after Panther got there. Okay, so let's go through this crisis from the top. There is a rebellion in the internal part of Morocco. The French insist on sending troops to protect property which is on the coast of Morocco from Europeans, and force the Sultan to accept them. This makes the Sultan look even weaker in face of the rebellion and causes even more people to side with the rebellion. The French then approach the Germans and basically say, we'll give you territory elsewhere if you give us Morocco. The Germans say, fine, let's start a negotiation. The French take so long to respond, the Germans decide to tweak the tail by sending a gunboat to rescue their civilians in Morocco from something which isn't actually really happening to anywhere where there are Europeans. There are no words to describe this really as and let's be honest, at this point, then the French go absolutely because the Germans have sent that. The British reaction was they felt that France was largely responsible for the triggering the crisis and ought therefore to be urged to give ground, or at least shut up. And they tried to dissuade France from sending troops. In April, the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, wrote, "What the French contemplate doing is not wise. We cannot, under our agreement, interfere." Basically, this is under the agreement of the Cartagena agreement, okay? So under Cartagena, we have agreed not to interfere in what they consider as their territories. No matter how silly we think what's going on, we are not supposed to interfere. As such, the cabinet authorised Grey to inform France that Britain might accept a German presence in Morocco. The French government replied angrily that any such acceptance would breach the 1904 Anglo-French agreement. The British were going, "You started this. You brought this on yourselves." At this point, the British start to think about the Germans having a naval port on the Atlantic. And at which point, the cabinet goes to Grey, okay, you have approval in July to inform the German ambassador that Britain would respond forcefully to defend its interests. The British sent battleships to Morocco in case war broke out. They didn't send any troops. And it shows the strength of the Entente Cordiale. However, very quickly you find that Grey, Lloyd George, and Asquith, who support the Entente, and are being isolated by the non-interventionists who make up the majority of the cabinet. And in fact, at this point, Lloyd George makes a Mansion House speech, which to bypass sort of the non-interventionists. Viscount Morley, the Secretary of State for India, denounced the speech Lloyd George made, and I'll be quoting from that second, denounced the speech as unwarranted and unfortunate provocation to Germany. Lord Lurban, the Lord Chancellor, entreated Grey to take a non-interventionist stance and disavow the speech. There was even later that year a backbench revolt against Grey, which was unsuccessful, and this was mainly because the British the British politicians did not like the Russians, which are part of the Entente now, and they saw this as provocation. You also have the fact going on here that the British are starting to get the impression that they are winning the Anglo-German naval race, and the Germans are starting to be a little bit more concessionary. And most importantly, they see this crisis as being something manufactured by the French themselves. And this is the quote from Lloyd George's speeches. If Britain is treated badly, where her interests are vitally affected, as if she is of no account in the cabinet of nations, then I say emphatically that peace at that price would be a humiliation intolerable for a great country like ours to endure. And basically, the Germans interpret that as you have to make sure that this is an acceptable peace solution for the French and for you. Ooh, do you know what on? Enjoy, I hope. Take care. Enjoy your dinner, Dutchman. Colin Cameron, Entente Cordiale was probably thought to be some new flavour of diluting juice by most of the population, and probably would have been better if it was. It turns out, well, that's gunboat diplomacy with actual gunboats. Well, British would use a cruiser or two or more. Usually the British use a gunboat. The reason they send actual battleships on this occasion is because they want to look like they're supporting the French, without actually supporting the French. The battleships look big and impressive, but don't require you to add any troops or do anything else. Anyway, so in the middle of this, Germany is hit by financial turmoil. The stock markets plunged 30% in a single day. The public started cashing in their currency notes for gold, and there's a run on the banks. And the Reichsbank loses a fifth of its gold reserves in 1 month. Now, it's often rumoured that the French finance minister had orchestrated this crisis. I think if anyone orchestrated this crisis, it wasn't the French. Because the French don't have that amount of economic power. If you're looking for a country which might have had the economic power to do such a thing to Germany at this time, well, it's not the French. The French could do a lot of damage, but it would have done a lot of damage to them as well. So the odds are they wouldn't do that. But there is always the other option and the other member of the Entente Cordiale. Of course, it wouldn't be the first time or the last time the British would use economic means to undermine an opponent, and let's be honest, the British have a lot more of the economic world system, even at that point, running through them than anyone else does. So if anyone wants to do it quietly and subtly, it's probably the British. The French have the most to gain from it, theoretically, but the British don't want to fight a war, and they especially don't want to fight a war at this point because they're going to win the naval war shortly, on paper at least, because of the numbers of ships soon. So why fight it? And also, the other advantage of causing economic damage to the Germans is that it undermines their efforts to fight and to build their ships. And they're almost forced off the gold standard. So the Kaiser backs down and lets France take over most of Morocco, apart from those parts which have been claimed by Spain. In July, the German ambassador in Paris informs the French government that Germany has no territorial aspirations in Morocco and would negotiate for a French protectorate on the basis of compensation for Germany in the French Congo region. Here you go. So many problems in modern Africa can be defined as being due to the various actions of nations in this period which were not African. In this case, this was France and Germany deciding to mix it up. So, there is a convention. Another one. And on the 4th of November, Franco-German negotiations between Caillaux and the Germans, that's the French economic and finance minister, led to a convention regarding to the Franco-German Accord, under which Germany accepted France's position in Morocco in response to the French Equatorial Africa colony of Middle Congo, now the modern Republic of the Congo, as outlined in the Morocco-Congo Treaty. This 275,000 kilometer square area, known as Nukraman, became part of the German colony of Cameroon. The area is partially marshland, where sleeping sickness was apparently widespread, but gave Germany an outlet on the Congo River. Germany, in return, ceded to France a small area of territory to the southeast of Fort Lamy, now part of Chad. Caillaux's negotiations with the Germans were leaked, which caused him to fall from office in 1912. He was the Premier of Westman, after a term of only 7 months. In Germany, the accord was so criticised so badly that the foreign minister was also forced to resign. And at one point, the Kaiser's own son was clapping people opposing it in the Reichstag. It basically, everyone hated it, so it was probably a fair deal. There's also an interesting point that it starts to, well, cause an interesting idea to start to percolate in France. In that Raymond Poincaré, the premier who succeeded Caillaux in early 1912, believed that whenever we have adopted a conciliatory approach to Germany, she has abused it. On the other hand, on each occasion when we have shown firmness, she has yielded. This drew the conclusion that Germany only understood a forceful response, and therefore, in future, we must always be hardline, hard. Okay, that's a problem. Oh, we can all get into that one. There are so many issues with in the world. But anyway, let's go to resolution round 2. So, legacy round 2. Well, let's start off. It deepened the Entente Cordiale with France. They agreed a secret naval agreement where the Royal Navy promised to protect the northern coast of France from German attack. The France concentrated a fleet in the Western Mediterranean, agreed to defend British interests there, and the Royal Navy pledged to protect French interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. In other words, the French were basically allowed to have the Western Mediterranean and everything else in the world was British. the Royal Navy was not upset with this idea. As for the rest, well, okay. So this book comes out of it. Published mostly in the 1920s. And I call it pseudo history. And that's me being polite. There are various people who talk about the decline of the West, or the downfall of the Occident, or the Oswald Spengler's work. And here is the point. There is some good history in there. There is some good stuff. But that is crowded out by the overwhelmingly large amount of ideology and I don't know what you can cry. Some people call it structuralism, some call it predeterminism, all sorts of things in there. Basically, you get some people, and academia does seem to be right with them, but the whole world has them, who basically believe that to come across as smart, they must constantly be predicting everything falling apart and failing. They don't offer solutions or ideas. They just say, "Oh, it's all going wrong. It's all going wrong," And they're always offering those critiques. That is Spangler. He is the historian of the 1920s and 30s equivalent of the guy in the party who sits there with a pipe sometimes, pontificating in the corner about how everything in the world is going to pot and everything is bad and wrong. And honestly, this crisis is often his starting point because he uses it as an illustration of how the West is falling. And you sort of go, is it? Is it really? Is it? Also, he likes to put everything on 1,000-year epochs. And basically, his idea is that civilization is a period where a group will dominate for 1,000 years and then they'll decline for 1,000 years, and another group will rise up and dominate for 1,000 years and decline for 1,000 years. There's a few problems with that mathematically, but we'll leave that to one side. It's a case of grow up. I mean, I am a historian, and I do believe we can learn lessons from the past by reading it, so hopefully don't repeat the same mistakes in the future. But there is no way I would ever say the past gives us an accurate prediction, 100% prediction of the future, or tells us what's necessarily going to happen. Because you sit there and go, well, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. You can honestly put that down to corruption, but also the problems of the Roman Empire in terms of actually fulfilling what it was required to do. You'd have had to develop a far, far more advanced tax base to sustain the Roman Empire. There is a level at which its own bureaucracy starts to eat itself because it can't sustain what you're dealing with. And that's the problem. I would argue the single biggest British invention of the Napoleonic War era, which sustains their economy and allows them to build an empire, is the income tax. Because you have to start doing a lot of administration to work that. And then you have the administration for the navies. So you have the tax basis and you have the industrial base to support the navy. And that enables you to do everything else. And this is the reality of what you're dealing with. And this is just, it's all going terribly. Well, but have you asked yourself why? Why did it go terribly? Have you asked yourself why other countries are doing quite well? And it's one of those things. The big economic crises of the 1930s, etc.,
in 1920s and 1930s, they are massive economic crises. But in many ways, they are due to the imbalance caused in the economic system by World War One and the way that certain systems were managed post World War One. Now, we could talk about the release of price controls and inflation, etc., which comes on after World War One because of the increase in spending power, etc., to combat and consumerization. And we can also talk about the economic restructuring that's going on. There are lots of issues there. There are lots of things going on that need to be considered that are a lot more contextual and nuanced than a simple "it's the rise and the fall" explanation. And that's probably my biggest problem with this book and these two books, is that they are pretty much everything does this, then it does that. And it's a case of your worldview is incredibly simple. Jennifer, and this work of Spengler sounds like an advanced portrait of the Thousand-Year Reich, and we saw how that turned out. Don't get me started. Don't get me started on that. And as certain people point out, 2 world input wars would hurt anyone's economy. It does. It also causes other issues, which have to be restructured and dealt with. Anyway, here is the cumulative impact of these 2 crises. Let's see. We have the German construction program, the British construction program, the dreadnoughts in service, the dreadnoughts under construction, the pre-dreadnoughts under construction for France. This is one of those scenarios where you look at it and you go, wow. So that happened. That really happened. Oops, sorry. Anyway, I hit the mute button. Apologies. Okay, so if I unmute myself, well, you've got plenty of time to study the slide. Anyway, the point is, there is, while all these things are going, the naval race is going on. There's a lot of naval development going on. There's a lot of the Navy working it and developing itself.
And this becomes a factor going on. So there are these crises, but there's also the Anglo-German naval race. There's the whole wider naval race. And that's why I like the Puck cartoon, because it shows that everyone's involved in the dreadnought race. And that is the thing. There are lots of countries involved in the dreadnought race. There are lots of nations building dreadnoughts. So you have to consider it a far larger formation, and you have to consider it a far more cumulative impact. These are about generating a certain level of atmosphere. They're not necessarily about generating a reality. Jano, someone should have told Spengler that international relations are not Newtonian society of equal and opposite reactions. I have tried to say that. Colin Cameron, sound drops as soon as you put up the graph. Well, I think I've covered up now. Thank you. Sorry. Very solid. They tried to use financial and economic methods which worked on small scale of small city states to run an empire. No foot or theirs, of course. That was basically the truth for the Romans. Henry, you have a future as a mime. Unfortunately, I wasn't miming. I was talking. But anyway, apologies for that one. So the cumulative impact of all these crises is that there is a level of crisis being thought about. That you have started to harden the alliances on each side. But they're not nearly as solid as you might think. Because the Franco-Russian alliance is fairly strong. The Anglo-French Entente is as strong as the British are ever going to really let it be in peacetime. The Anglo-Japanese alliance is as strong as the British would like it to be. And the Triple Alliance is, well, really a quadruple alliance, but 2 members won't join World War One. So that shows how on the side they'll actually join the other side in World War One. So that shows its real strength. This is the point I'm always trying to make. On paper, you have these alliances. And on paper, they are incredibly strong. But perhaps the lesson for us today is that you have to be careful about trusting necessarily a paper alliance. Because if your actions can be viewed as offensive rather than defensive, then in a defensive alliance, they might not join you to fight the war. And they might even join the other side. Hello, veteran Assumi. Hello, my copy of your book just came in. Woohoo! I hope you like the book. So, this is from a previous presentation I did, which included the Tangiers and Jersas conference. And I wanted to point it out because it's a quote from Massey from his book Dreadnought. On March the 1st, the combined British Atlantic and Mediterranean fleets appeared in the harbour. 20 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers, an immense display of naval power. At Nicholson's suggestion, Admiral Lord Charles Beresford, the British Commander-in-Chief, invited all the delegates to dinner on board his flagship, King Edward VII. To avoid difficulties of protocol, no national anthems were performed, and a single toast of the evening was to all sovereigns and republics. The massed bands of the fleet played, and as the diplomats were ferried back to the Algeciras, 140 fleet searchlights beamed into the night sky. Thereafter, when delegates looked towards Gibraltar and saw the ships lying beneath the towering rock, Count Tattenbach's bad temper seemed less threatening. That's naval diplomacy. WP to date is the only alliance to Western invaded one of its members. Warsaw Pact. Interesting organization. Very interesting organization. But reality-wise, did this lead to World War One? No. Honestly, I would debate with people whether the Anglo-German naval race led to World War One. I think there's a lot of preconditions which it sets in place, but I don't think it leads directly to World War One. I think one of the fundamental problems and reasons for World War One is that you have an entire system of politics really set up into the 1870s, 1880s, which only works when you have people like Bismarck at its center, especially for Germany, trying to balance and a massive amount of competing demands. And as you can see, Bismarck does a lot of roles and wears a lot of coats. However, pursuing that kind of multifaceted diplomacy only works when you A, have a coherent team working together, and B, when you have a coherent leadership. The trouble is that after Bismarck goes, Germany certainly doesn't have coherent leadership. And I would argue quite a few other countries don't. And I would argue this is what leads to World War One far more. You have not a very coherent leadership. You have France, which is not quite here's our new Prime Minister of the week, but are certainly having an interesting time leadership-wise and politics-wise. You have Britain, which is reluctantly realizing that it needs to change its diplomatic model, because its diplomatic model had always been based on splendid isolation, which works very well up until a certain point. And traditionally, they had known when that point was and started being able to organize differently. And the trouble was, they're suddenly faced in Europe in that their traditional ally by this point, Prussia or Germany, is no longer their ally. But their other potential alternative ally, France, well, they're not exactly an ally the British are close to, and the British have had incidents with the French very recently. There have been war scares with the French, as in the 1890s, in the early 1900s, there have been war scares with the French. So they're not exactly high on the British appreciation list. And then they come with the Russians, who are even less British-like. It's a case of picking the lesser of two evil, a lesser of multiple evil options. Going alone is a very, very bad scenario for the British, because it could end up with them dealing with an overmighty opponent in Europe. Forming up with the Germans, well, the Germans are trying to build a navy and threatening the British world position. That's directly with that navy, because it's close to it's a navy focused on an island nation which is naval dependent on its maritime for its security and the security of its empire, which is not good. Or go the French, who are your premier colonial problem. And the Russians, who are your perennial Middle Eastern and Far Eastern thorny problem. Honestly, I think the problem is that there is a lot of people with a lot of pride wandering around in these halls of power who are very, oh, I'm proud, I do not want my honor to be besmirched, or bearing grudges, and not a lot of people who are prepared to exercise common sense. And that is ultimately the problem. Germany has a system designed by Bismarck for someone like Bismarck to run. But they don't have someone like Bismarck from 1890 onwards. And that means that the progressively next 30 years are increasingly more and more inevitably getting worse. Britain has a system which is designed around, to an extent, splendid isolation, and are now trying to adjust. And honestly, for that, you need to start adjusting your strategic thinking, and you need to start adjusting your psychology in many respects. And the whole problem you can see with Britain, which ends up leading World War I, is the fact that we do not have a grand strategy. We don't have a unified strategy in World War I. We have a naval strategy and we have an army mobilization plan. And I'm being quite honest now, because deploying troops to France is not strategy. That's a mobilization plan. We're mobilizing them, sending the French, and going where the French want us to. That is not a strategy. That is a mobilization plan. You can say that's a strategic position because we are supporting the French. You are quite correct in that scenario. But it's not a strategy to go, we are just supporting the French. How are we supporting the French? What will we do? And in the nicest way, if that really is your strategy, why do you have such a tiny little freaking army? You know, we're talking about deploying 100,000 troops or a little bit more to support a 3 million army. It's a case of, are you sure this is a strategy? And on the flip side, we have the world's largest navy, which has a strategy, but that strategy would have involved the army either being deployed to Belgium to protect that coastline, which would have made sense, or alternatively getting the Germans to do what they've done many, many other times, invading Denmark, using their invasion of Denmark to reinforce the Danish troops, which are already the Danish have already built lines, which are mostly being financed by British banks, have already built defensive lines around Copenhagen and on the islands on Copenhagen. So there's no quick. Germans advance into Denmark is not going to be quick to get to Copenhagen. It might be going up the main body of Denmark. It might move quite quickly. It depends how many troops they can send. If they're already fighting the French at the time, they're probably not going to send many. And if they're fighting the French and the Russians, then they're not going to have many to go up to Denmark. And that's going to slow down their pace of advance and allow the Danish more time to mobilize. And if the British then reinforce the Danish in Copenhagen and their lines, then the Royal Navy has access to the Baltic. And that's the naval strategic plan. Which was what they would have used the BEF for. And 5 divisions supporting the Danish army, holding the lines the Danish have built to defend Copenhagen and the islands which lead to Copenhagen, that would have probably been a significant force and could have helped do that. But no, they're off fighting and supporting the French. And don't let me get it started on the rest of them. You've got the Americans, who are both trying to be splendidly isolated like the British, and then in case modelling themselves on the British, but also wanting to send out demands of people being peaceful. You have the French. Their strategy is just absurd. Think about it. Strategic point. We're going to leave our traditional enemy to secure our northern coastline. You are? And in return, we're going to secure the Mediterranean, where we don't think any fighting is going to take place. Why do you have a navy at all, then? We might have to fight the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians. You don't have enough shit. You're not going to fight the Italians, because in the nicest way, if it had been a combined Italian-Austro-Hungarian fleet versus the French Navy in the Western Mediterranean, the French Navy would have been sunk. Between the Italian dreadnoughts and the Austro-Hungarian dreadnoughts, there wouldn't have been a single French ship left.
The Royal Navy would end up having to send ships down there to fight the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians. Because that is the scenario. So in no scenario does it not end up with the Royal Navy having to have a presence in the Mediterranean. Because the French do not have enough ships to fight the Austro-Hungarians combined with the Italians, which theoretically on the Triple Alliance is what they're going to face. So, no, and don't get me started on the Russian and the Austro-Hungarian strategies. I'm just not going there. But this is the point. World War One, in my view, happens because people have ideas, not strategy. People have feelings, not thoughts. They have impetus because they expect there to be a war, not understanding of what a war will be. And that is terrible. That is an absolutely soul-crushing thing to think about, really. That one of the greatest loss of lives we've ever inflicted on each other happened because no one sat back and actually applied their brain on either side. How do you want to deter World War One? Mobilize the Royal Navy at high speed and send them to exercise off the Danish coast. Don't hang around. Don't wait and half mobilize, half not, or send mixed signals to the Germans. No, mobilize, head straight for the Baltic. And watch the Germans go. Because the Baltic is their Achilles heel. Everyone knows that. And if you mobilize and head there while there's still peace, there's nothing they can do other than actually declare war, which they're not ready for and they don't want to do. And they're going to get the impression that you're very much committed, so they're going to think, And half the reason the Germans start war is because they think the British are being wishy-washy. If the British had mobilized, immediately sent the troops to Belgium to reinforce the Belgians and secure the Belgian sovereignty, and mobilized the fleet at the same time, those would have sent a massively strong, image to the Germans and gone, budge, okay. But they don't. They talk about deploying to France. They don't do it. They talk about mobilizing the fleet. They don't do it. And nothing happens. The French, they talk strong. Nothing happens. And the reality here is this. Diplomacy can be about hard power, soft power, smart power, perceptions of power, and the image of power. But you need to make an actual decision and stick with it, because nothing looks weaker than vacillation. And that's it. And Irishable, hello. From what I've read about it, the concert of Europe was a stable system so long as its constituents remained as they were. After the revolution in the 1840s and the formation of Germany in 1871, the system required balancing a very tight balance of diplomacy, which people like Bismarck were well equipped to handle. It requires realpolitik. To be fair, Bismarck wasn't the only statesman capable of this at this time. It's just, by the time you get to the 1910s, there really aren't many around in position to actually implement it. At some point, I'm going to have to explain to people I do lives on a Thursday. Anyway. Vision. German Victorian political system sounds like Japanese one, designed to be run by those that designed it. Doesn't work when those statesmen are dead. No, it didn't.
Bichon, the Japanese Meiji constitution was modelled on the German one, despite working in practice most of the time like the Westminster system, as the emperor didn't get involved publicly in politics. Hmm. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyway. Discord. It's designed to be used by those that realize that a big war between European powers results in everyone losing, so it has to be avoided. It requires someone who wants to maintain a balance. True. I've wrote, the defend Denmark strategy seems very appealing once Fisher's battle cruisers make it through the Danish belt. Yeah, that's pretty much the idea. Oh, Richard, given the political ineptitude of Berlin, Paris, Vienna, and Moscow, the First World War was always a matter of when, not if. Yep. Oh, we've picked up another Russian troll. Thank you, Sean Mack, for dealing with them. Come on, guys. If the French Navy cannot secure troops and supplies for Africa, the Western Front collapses. True. And let's be honest, the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians would have dealt with that. It would be in the Royal Navy would have to gun and support them. Jonathan, Alex, Doug Lights, the political situation in European theatre prior to World War I shows the politicians were not overburdened with common sense than any more they are today. Whilst I don't appreciate that particular historian I've pointed out there, I would argue that the politicians at that time actually had access to more sense. They just didn't use it. And I see the same sometimes today, because sometimes you have the problem, and the amount of times I will get, I will see things which sort of people point out and go, oh, look, this person said this at this time, but no one took it, and they didn't do it. And you go, why not? Well, there's a lot of other voices saying the complete opposite, the wrong thing. And the thing is, the person saying it is not persuasive to the people in power to make the decision. Or rather, to the public, to get the public support, or to the public, to get the public support to persuade the people in power. And that's a problem. Carl van Gasberg. Ironically, the Hungarian part of Austria-Hungary wasn't too keen about going to war. The rest is history, as it said often. Colin Cameron. In order to prevent war in Europe, two superblocks developed. Us, the French and Russians on one side, and the Germans and Austro-Hungarians on the other. The idea was to have two vast opposing armies, each acting as the other's deterrent. That way, there could never be war. Pretty much as you Blackadder pointed out, as you quote, that was the idea. But the trouble is, once you had those two armies, you had a load of generals who wanted to test them out. And more importantly, usually those generals were not the ones actually serving. Those were usually the generals who had retired. Inca can't send troops to Belgium in July 1914 as Belgium was neutral and will not allow any foreign troops on their territory. True, but what you would do is you would say we will not. You would announce you're guaranteeing Belgian neutrality and deploying those troops to the coast of the UK, mobilizing those troops and deploying them to the coast of the UK with fast transports, and saying that if anyone goes near Belgium, those troops will be in Belgium in a matter of a few hours. You might even stick some on the ships already and stick them off outside the territorial limits of Antwerp to make sure you secure Antwerp. You can do that without risking a Belgian sovereignty. And that is something you, as Sean Max says, that's something you need to fix with pre-war diplomacy. Basically, you could get an agreement with the Belgians that you are going to do that whilst they're neutral, in the nicest way, you're protecting their neutrality. And if anyone, you just announce, if anyone invades Belgium, we already have the troops ready to deploy to Belgium. they'll be there straight away. Desert Fox, how would you have redesigned German economic policy under Bismarck to allow less capable statesmen and politicians to have success? If I was Bismarck, I wouldn't, of course, do that because he wants the power for himself to maintain it. You need a constitution which actually holds statesmen to account and actually provides a promotion for their abilities based on something other than the Kaiser loving you. So you need a kind of constitutional system like the British one. Because in the British Constitution, yes, you need to actually succeed. You need to actually be good at your job as a politician, at least. And that's the very... This is going to sound strange. This is one of the problems for Germany, is that their leaders are sometimes very good at getting the Kaiser to agree with them, but are very bad politicians, which is why the politicians in Britain, especially, often misunderstand their German colleagues. Because the British politicians, they might not be very good at other things, but they are good politicians. Churchill. There are many points at which him and I disagree on strategy and some other things. But so elections after World War II, notwithstanding, where he felt he couldn't really campaign, he didn't need to campaign on anything other than his war record and on being great, which were a little bit politically inept, but also probably suggests he's just gone through the whole war and he's probably a bit worn out. He's actually pretty darn good at the politics. And this is the point. You might not like Boris Johnson, but if you want to really say he's bad at politics, he does make some mistakes and some errors of judgment. I will concede that, but he's also won a fair number of elections and other things in places where he wasn't supposed to, which show that he's got good skills at politics when he deploys them and actually starts thinking of them. And this is the point. The British political system is fairly cutthroat. The Labour Party is just as likely to eat their own as the Conservative Party are. So you have the internal politics and of the political parties, which affect the people getting to the top, and the Liberals and all the others. And you also have the electoral politics of, can they persuade enough people to vote for them? Can they sell enough of their message? And again, the British system is first past the post, which is, many people go, oh, we don't like it, because it's maybe, they question its democratic value. But the point is, it's very good at keeping out the extremes, which is one advantage of it, of having any political representation. And two, it forces you to compete for the middle ground. Any political party which wants to win elections has to compete and hold the middle ground in the British politics. And that's the thing. So it's making a judgment as to where the middle ground is. The German political system, as it was developed by, well, Otto von Bismarck didn't want to have to deal with fricking elections. He didn't want to have to deal with the actual public. So he designed a system where he was basically appointed, he served at the pleasure of the Kaiser, which is lovely, as long as you have the pleasure of the Kaiser. When you don't, you're in trouble. That's good. I saw someone in the media referring to experts as Cassandras as an insult recently. Ironic. Cassandra was cursed to give true prophecy to those in power who would ignore them. Yeah. Hammersberg, Ian and Carr and Dr. Clarke. Maybe sending a British regiment to Belgium for training manoeuvres and a Belgian regiment to the UK in exchange. There are all sorts of options you could have done. Nice, I think you've lost a bet. Well, no, we'll announce that on the 2nd of January, but I'm unless I get a massive surge in support, I doubt I'm going to win it. Unless I think I would have to put on about 6,000 subscribers in the next 24 hours to have a chance of winning. Hey, Schleitz. They've released the live update for UAD, which made some tweaks to the ship design section. Tried a couple of your designs earlier. I know. I've been playing on today. Death Squad, send a load of infrastructure and logistics advisors to Belgium. Nothing to do with war, just happens to be able to move an army quickly through Belgium. There are all sorts of options you could have done. But they weren't done. So what have we got coming up? Naval history coming up in a month. Well, the long patrols. We've got the Ideal class, the Kent class, the Nautilus class, the Plutons. I haven't decided what I'm doing on the 25th of January. I have an idea, but that depends on whether I get my paychecks on time, and I can therefore afford to go and for a little drive. If I can afford to go for a little drive, there will be a recorded video from somewhere very interesting. If I can't afford to go for a little drive, there'll be a different long patrol on 25th of January. And then the 1st of February, London class counties. And then the 8th of February, Brommer class, the Kaiserlich Marine. I like the Brommer class. I'm going to enjoy talking about them. We also have, on 6th of January, the quirky classes and what they tell us about their navies. Now, quirky classes, and I'm going to take suggestions for this. If you have suggestions, please do message them and put them down under the bottom of this in the comment section of this video. But quirky classes are things like HMS Unicorn. She's going to feature in there as quirky classes. Basically, ships which don't fit neatly into other categories, but tell us a lot about the navies. The Abdeel class is probably going to show up again because, well, A, I have the slides already done for them, but B, they don't fit neatly in the cruiser or destroyer category. They're labeled a cruiser because of their size, but they are a mine-laying ship. What they tell us about the Royal Navy. And there's a few other classes. The Panzerschief are going to fit in there because they are really heavy cruisers, but they don't fit in the heavy cruiser mold because of their 11-inch guns and various other things. So what are they? What do they tell us about the German Navy at the time? And there's going to be some Japanese ships there. I'm considering which particular class of warship I'm going to pick for the American Navy from this one because they've got a couple which are interesting. I might try and do them both. But you know, I'm going to take suggestions. I ideally would like about 8 classes on my list, and mostly I'm looking for 1920s and 1930s navies. Hello, Ethan. I know I said about the bet. Trying to click my side is like proof Germany could have easily won the Battle of the Atlantic using this one weird trick. Boom, swimming in the subs. No. I get enough stick for doing YouTube from academia as it is without doing that. I don't mind. Frankly, I give the stick back to them, but frankly, I'm not giving them ammunition. Thank you, Carmen Gosback. There's a Vox. Why were the British pulling out of Splendid Isolation? What was it? Basically, the British had for about 70 odd years pretty much managed to never agree a treaty or anything with anyone else in the 19th century. The 19th century, the British managed to be the preeminent power by never entering a formal alliance with anyone, just informally agreeing things. Rolls-Royce diplomacy the whole way, but never having formal arrangements. And pretty much people then go, well, they suddenly start having these formal arrangements, the Entente Cordiale, the Anglo-Japanese. So that's the end of Splendid Isolation. But A, that's overestimating how much isolation was involved in Splendid Isolation, because remember the Crimean War was fought in that time, and a few other conflicts as well, which involved multinational groupings. And there was also a few other issues. And as said, there is a difference between Entente and Alliance. And convention. Nice again, the Admiral class. I don't think a battle cruiser fits as a quirky class. M35 Benvitz, the Russian round ships. Possibly. No, Phillips, the Indian revolt does not happen. EIC, East Indian Company collapses when they play silly-billy in the American Civil War. India becomes an independent British-aligned power after a short civil war. They develop a path similar to Japan and China, developing a battle fleet and renting a base to the British on Ceylon. How does it affect things going forward into World War One and World War Two? You're presuming that Ceylon, which was a separate colony and very much separate in government to India, goes the same way, and the British might keep Ceylon. The nicest way, Britain might actually, the Royal Navy might intervene to make sure Britain retains Ceylon, so that might not be part of that, but it could have an interesting impact on things. It certainly means Britain has to take less of Singapore might be a joint colony in that it might have troops from multiple powers there. Second, how easy would it be to modify Abdeel class into being super destroyers? Not that difficult. You'd want to take out the mine laying capacity to an extent and increase and put in 4.5-inch guns and more torpedoes, but you could do it. How you would take every ounce of my being to avoid criticizing academic cynicism on YouTube constantly. I have iron brew. Thank you, Sean. 9681, incomparable. That might really fit there as a special. That's good. But no reason. I'd argue Johnson won elections because he's a populist and his opposition didn't know how to oppose populism in elections. I would agree, but what does being a populist mean about being about why does being a populist make you bad at politics? And I would argue that the reason he's called a populist is because he's able to take his ideas and sell them to the electorate, and so forth, they become popular. Don't take this the wrong way, but the whole point of elections is they are popularity contests. It tends to be the one who's better at selling their ideas, i.e. who makes their ideas popular, who wins elections. So one of the things I find funny, whenever people are going, oh, they're a populist politician, you go, so you mean they get votes? Does that mean you're not a popular politician? So in other words, you're a bad one and can't get votes? Oh, well, yeah. It's quite funny to watch once you turn that on around. The whole populist politician thing doesn't wash with me as an insult. A popular politician is supposed to be popular because they spoke in a democracy, because they're supposed to get people to vote for them. People don't tend to vote for people they don't like or they don't agree with or they don't like the ideas of. I would call Jeremy Corbyn a populist politician. He just wasn't as good as as Johnson as a populist politician in selling his ideas to enough people. There is nothing wrong with being a populist politician, i.e. selling your ideas to more people and making your ideas popular. It's what you're supposed to do. The only people who don't like populist politicians tend to be unelected bureaucrats of multinational organizations which don't like people getting in their way and who feel that they can have a structured thing. It's like people who structural predeterminism, who want to predict how everything's going to go, want everyone to be sort of grey, interchangeable. And populist politicians tend to be spanners in the works for those sort of scenarios. And the reality is populist politicians make up a lot of history. Churchill. He wins an election. He's a popular, let's be honest, he's not a populist politician. Yes, populist politicians in some political systems can turn into dictators or just DICKs. But you also have Obama is a populist politician. He won a massive election astoundingly. Clinton was a populist politician. Kennedy was a populist politician. Lots of people have been populist politicians, and usually that means in their time they are popular and they have sold their politics well.
this is turning into a rant about this, but the idea that being a popular or a populist politician is a bad thing usually comes from people who say they want you to speak to their small particular point of view and not look at the majority. And in a democracy, you tend to end up having to represent the majority, and that's not a bad thing. You have to do it while standing up for the rights of minorities, because every majority is formed up of lots of different groups of minorities. There is no such thing as a homogeneous majority. There isn't. Everyone's different and individual in it. But getting the largest number of the people as you can to support you is the very essence of democracy, and in the very essence of how you win. And that is also the very essence of popularity. What becomes worrying is when your politics are that bad as a political party, you go hunting for people who don't have any understanding of politics because you can't produce your own popular people to give you popularity. And they can be captured by anyone, any particular faction in your political party because of that. That is when there's problems. That is when you have to be worried. Sean, great doing. Thanks for all the lockdown company and good luck for 22. Thank you. And there will be a video out tomorrow, and there will be the long patrol version of this out on New Year's Day, because I thought tomorrow you'd probably prefer something more interesting and quicker than the long patrol version of this probably will be. Ooh, Surkov, the Vermont coastal adventure ships, M-class submarines. Yeah. Come goes with 3 battleships plus 1 armored cruiser as one class practice of the of Austro-Hungarian Kriegsmarine counters a quirk. Not really. There's a Fox. Battlecruiser in general in the 30s. Quirky in general in British Haven. The Congo class would like you to notice them. Desert Fox. They really would. They feel ignored. Guys, populists often use the derogatory term for someone who does not keep the promises given. Less so, and also you have to remember one of the other problems, and this is something I often find it's used at the moment to describe people, is quite a lot of people are holding governments to pre-COVID promises and then going, well, you haven't kept promises. And quite a lot of and that's one side. Usually that's the opposition saying that to the government, and the government's going, well, COVID's happened. And most of the public are going, yeah, COVID's happened. Well, it's not washing necessarily that well politically. Being a capable at politics is not the same as being capable at government. Johnson is good at playing party political games and selling to the public. I would say I do wish Johnson had a better team around him to support him with his things, because I don't think he necessarily is best served by the political machine which has been set up in 10 Downing Street. This is going to sound terrible to say this. I know because of my own background, because I know quite a lot of individuals involved there, and it's going to sound basically the person who set up Dominic Cummings, who set up the Johnson political machine in 10 Downing Street, believed himself to be Bismarck, really, and Johnson to be Kaiser Wilhelm. And when he found out that Kaiser Johnson was not prepared to be Kaiser Wilhelm and wanted to be far more involved, he didn't really adjust the system to that, because he tried to keeping him out. And the trouble is, the current system is sort of a hodgepodge between what it should be and what it doesn't reflect Johnson's style of government, and it doesn't really reflect
what the team he sort of needs around him. But making drastic changes would probably cause too much of an issue at the current time. So it's been, because of COVID and various other things, a constant hodgepodge mix. And that's where you get a lot of the problems coming from, I think, in 10 Downing Street. But that's completely off topic, but that's my analysis. Jack Ray, Sanford likes populist politicians as long as they do what they're told by civil servants. Demagogue is more of an insult if you want to convey that idea. Schumacher, setting up lines of terrorist vengeance equivalents give you a lot of strategic options, but you need to set them up in advance. That's pretty much what the Danish had already done in Denmark. That's good. I study populism as the core of my dissertation. I'm using populism as a description of the ideological position. I'm not saying it's merely popular. Yeah, but I don't like that phrase, that word now, because of what it's become used for in British political debate. Yeah, Dove Squad. Yeah, I've read Cosmode. And I still don't. The trouble is, there's the academic debate of what populism is, and there's the public debate of what populism is used as, and the two have diverged quite a long. There's quite a heavy bit. Marga, there's a very different definition of populism than what I'm also seeing. The definition I'm used to see is that they don't follow any particular ideology and instead support what they think is popular. That is usually the view put forward, but there's the other thing is that's the idea. How to put it? Populism is put forward as either, often by people who don't like it, as, oh, they just go with whatever they see as popular. The other turn of things is because they support it, they're able to make it popular because they're good at selling it politically. And that's the argument you don't like. The people who often make the derogatory version of populism don't like hearing. And it's just as true. In that a good politician can make an idea popular, which then means because then if you want to read it backwards, you go, oh, they supported that because it was popular. But when you look at the facts, you sort of go, hang on, was it really popular before they became involved? Was it really as popular as it became? Or were they good at selling it? Were they good at doing the political part of it? And the trouble is, if you say the latter form, you're giving them credit. And again, we don't have politics these days where you can acknowledge your opponent has any skills or capabilities at all. You have to put them down at every turn because that's what Twitter and that's what all the things demand. I can sit here as a academic and former borough councillor and say, yeah, I liked working with my colleagues from the various different political parties because they brought different ideas, and some of them I would never vote for or agree with personally. But I liked working with them and I liked debating them because I thought they made the things better. And I would say that openly, which is another reason why I would never get further in local council, because I like them. You know, I won't name names, but I had one particular Labour colleague who I used to really enjoy being in meetings with because she was very, very smart. And I might not agree with her points, but I could always guarantee that her and I would have read all the notes going into the room. And if there was going to be any discussions in the room, it was usually between us. And we might take different sides, but that would actually make what was done in the end hopefully better. Because it would allow everyone in the room to consider all the perspectives and come up with the best solution. And that was the other problem with me. And that sometimes I would be supported because I'm a conservative, but I'm a very old style conservative, which is I believe you shouldn't use ideology when making decisions. I don't sign up to small government or any of that stuff. That's all ideologies in my view. I believe what you should do is you should look at everything, all the facts involved, and you should chart the best course. And it doesn't matter whether it's a small government, big government, left wing, right wing, doesn't matter where the idea comes from. But if that's the best solution for the problem you've got, and that's the best fit for your scenario, that's what you should do. But, you know, that's very, very old fashioned. That's original conservatism, when it was a reaction to liberalism and the rise of a liberal party, which were using ideology to make decisions, which was a bad thing. They were using the liberal ideology. Terrible. And so there was conservatives with reaction, which I can understand why people go look at that and go, that's a bad thing, because liberalism is a good thing. It is a good thing. But the point is, you needed to persuade people of that. Anyway, let's answer the questions and then we'll finish for the evening, because I'm hungry and I want some food. Nice hearing. Would the M-class submarine aircraft carrier have been able to hold a fairy swordfish? Nope. They had very small aircraft designs for them. This one. It may be used as a political insult it has been used as a political insult for far too long, much like how people throw fascist around without knowing the meaning of the ideology. Or communist or socialist. They'll get chucked around. Dutchman, the problem is if you promise one thing to get elected and then do the opposite. I don't think Boris Johnson is the best leader the Labour Party ever had. I don't think that's quite that scenario yet. That's Fox. You did an entire video on why the Congos are battleships and battlecruisers. Okay, they got fat. So the IJN does not have battlecruisers. They have battlecruisers until they convert them into bad, fast battleships. So they're still battlecruisers into the 1930s. They're converted in the 1930s. So, for most of those years, there are other battlecruisers. By World War II, the RN's pretty much the only ones with proper battlecruisers left. That's good. I would argue that many of those people who say that Boris Johnson does that tend to be the people who have decided to say that after he doesn't do what they want him to do. Just remember, politics, you have no friends. You have people who are working alongside you until your views diverge, and then they'll use all their information they have against you. And no one ever went poor selling the line, oh, he only does what's popular. He only runs to the front when he sees what's popular. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's true at all. And look, I saw in the news report yesterday that divers found one or two Italian submarines torpedoed by their iron submarine. Cool. I know, I've seen that too myself, and it looks interesting. Now I take it to the free. What would a modernized M-class cruiser submarine have? A lot of people crying? We'll get into this. This will be next week's fun. Vision. For a conservative in America, you may be a flaming liberal. I think in America I would be a left-wing Republican or a right-wing Democrat. I'm not sure which one I would be. It probably depends on the state. In the UK, I'm only the political party I am because, to be honest, the other options there aren't. Excellent. Dr. C, what is a British war movie that you don't like because you see it as too much propaganda? Oh, there are so many. I'm not getting into that one. That's good. Isn't the best leader the German party's ever had. No, he isn't. He's people called them a lot of things. Be careful about that. And that's the first. They are the long-term lesson of this particular incident, which is why I've got into this politics after the Morocco crisis with questions. It's that you have to be very careful in terms of judging politicians and be very careful about the rhetoric that goes on in the media and the public influence, because everyone has an opinion, and sometimes it's got a firm basis in fact. But I see some things, and I look at them and I go, "That's not true." Foreign news is a great example of that. The amount of weird interpretations you get that. I could give you some examples. Let's sort of say, I have friends from around the world, and sometimes I see a news article come up, and I will send it to them and go, "So I hear this is going in the country," and they go, "That's about 6 months out of date," and it is. Dirt Squad. It's been something that a lot of people said about him in his days in school onwards. A lot of people who don't like him have said it for a long time. Must be true then. Also, in the nicest way, I always give the classic example of the Big Bang Theory episode where Sheldon and Amy have won the Nobel Prize. And who ends up on television as their best friends in the whole world? Howard and Bernadette. Yeah, anyone who's watched it doesn't cause trouble, but everyone who's watched the show knows it's Leonard and Penny by a long margin. Always be careful about anyone saying, "Oh, I'm this person's friend, and now I'm going to dish the dirt on them." A, you worry or have to wonder about the quality of their friendship, and B, maybe they were never that close a friend in the first place. I'm not getting into that one, Desert Foxo, but a lot of quite often. Regular off topic, but I got a piece of teak from Warspite from one of the sons for Xmas. Cool, Rick. That is cool. And how do I deal with them? Mostly by if I feel I'm in the mood, I ruin their worldview by having a conversation with them. If I'm not in the mood, I just ignore them. Like Carl goes with, and honestly, there are people from whom being yeah, there are some really interesting people. Anyway, and those good. Just because they don't like him doesn't mean it's not true. Especially just because someone does like him doesn't mean everything they say about someone is true. I agree on both those, but it also means usually, in my experience, what they say is a version of the truth, and it might be an exaggerated version of the truth. And also, you also have to be very careful when things become established truths, i.e., everyone repeats the same thing. So therefore, it must be true because lots of people repeated the same thing. But again, if we look in history, how many times have things been repeated by lots of different people, and then when you look into it, it didn't happen that way in any way, shape, or form. But that became the established narrative. I'm not saying it's not true. What I'm saying is, well, that's for a different conversation. Anyway, take care, everyone. Have fun, and I hope you have a nice evening. Generally, this conversation on politics reminds me of a quote I once read, which goes, "A critic is someone who can read the map but can't drive the vehicle." Right, so do you own any piece of naval ships? No, I don't. I tend to spend my money on very expensive books. Just a little bit off topic from what the chat is talking about, but political questions. If Grand Admiral Thrawn was both a Grand Admiral and a politician, how effective would he be? He probably could have replaced the Emperor. There's Vox. What do you think of the modern Labour, and do you think they're recovering from some? Oh, I think the Labour Party. I think honestly, it's a long way to the next election. I'll see what happens, but depends how good they get at selling their message for any of them, and whether their election strikes a chord with the majority of the British public. That's going to be it, or at least the largest number of them. Sure, see the cable with Japanese innovation. In a lot of ways, the system was very backward, but they could still make great aircraft. There's definitely an established narrative about it. Andrew, thanks and have a good evening. Good night, Delta Squad. Take care. Damn it, too late. Just. Thanks for great education. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Great night. Take care. And thank you, John Shea. And thank you, Frank Spanado. Thank you, Desert Fox. Thank you, DGV40. Thank you, George Newman. Thank you, Anuk. Afro, thank you. And Carl also, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for that. It's fun. And the theme for tonight, and I don't usually put this at the end of the video, but I'm going to put this at the end of this one. The theme of tonight basically comes down to beware of established narratives and constant thoughts going through. One of the things that we often get with World War One is that it's going to happen, and it's predetermined because of all these crises and these things that happen. So it must be going to happen. There is no such thing as it having to happen. And it's the same when we're talking about modern politics, when we're talking about everything. Be wary of established narrative norms. Because sometimes they become the narrative. Doesn't mean because they are the truth. It means they're the narrative norm. And you get that in a lot of history. If we can consider it, the narrative norm up until probably a couple of years ago, when you were looking at history, was the Italian Navy was basically ignored for World War II. And the Royal Navy didn't know anything about aircraft carriers and naval aviation and all these things. And that's been going on for up to a few years ago. And it's suddenly come back the other way. And people have realized that they did know stuff and they were just doing it in a different way. So I'm not saying narrative norm is always wrong. In fact, sometimes it's right. But often the reality is more complex and nuanced than necessarily a narrative norm is going to suggest. And these crises are a good example of that. Because normally when I start to talk to people about these crises, they go, oh, that's Germany being bad. And you go, well, yes. In the nicest way, the first crisis is definitely entirely on Kaiser Wilhelm. But the second crisis is kind of France. And it's mainly France bullying Morocco and Germany trying to get the best they can out of it. So it's generally just imperial politics at the time at its normal. It's nothing. It's not even really part of a major not even really sort of a major power thing, because then honestly, the British, most of it, are telling the French, going, if you end up fighting a war, we will not be backing you up over this one. Nope. And even when there's the agreement afterwards for the naval agreement, to be honest, for the British, that's yeah, we'll agree to that because we're going to have our navies there anyway. It doesn't lose us anything. But it allows the French to actually be a presence in the Western Mediterranean. Which is mostly a problem the British are dealing with, because otherwise the British are going to have the forces there. Because the reason the British will have the forces there is because the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians actually do have dreadnoughts and actually do have a designated fleet, and the French don't have pretty much anything. So unless they concentrate everything they have down there, they don't count. Anyway, take care, entire Slavic. Take care, Grace Selsie. Thank you, Walt92. Shumack, history does have trends, but they are affected by individuals. Carl re-establish norms. Even if in the EN actually works, it's worth to investigate the other ways to do things. Yeah. Take care, Jennifer. Thank you, Yikas. Wow, the Russian bots are really getting interesting. Thank you, Sean Mack. You've been doing good work this evening. And Night 6 everyone, take care. And Depscott, thank you. It'll be interesting to look at historical events in crisis with the Swiss cheese model of disaster prevention. Sometimes. Anyway, good year. New year. Have a good new year, everyone. Take care. And thank you for watching. Thank you, Kevin Ray. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Stafford, and thank you, Sean, for adminning. And thank you, Hood, and Night 6 everyone, Colin Cameron, Rick Rosala. Thank you, everyone, for being part of it. Take care. And take care, Aaron. Thank you.